I need to tell you that one of our storytellers canceled his appearance today, and we had had several conversations on the phone over the last year because his pastor had recommended that he tell his story, or recommended him. But we hadn't gotten together face to face to talk about his story until a few weeks ago. And I walked in a few minutes after him to the media center, and he's up at the front desk just kibitzing away with our office manager like they were old buddies. So Guillermo, he's a small man, but he's got a huge smile, and he's just full of charm, and he was wearing a bright pink running suit. And so we went upstairs, and he starts telling me his story, and I am just stupefied, and I'm asking him a whole bunch of questions, one after another. And he is like chugging water and clearing his throat. And in retrospect, I knew I should have asked, I know now I should have said, how are you doing? Are these too many questions? Because that night he sent me an email and he said, oh my God, this kicked up so much PTSD. I can't come and say this in front of an audience. But he gave me his blessing and his permission to tell his story here. And I want to do that in an abbreviated way because I want to honor his intention to share it with you and honor him. So Guillermo Oliva, he grew up with a pretty charmed life till 79. He was from El Salvador, but he'd gotten support from an uncle and scholarships to study in Germany and became a chemical engineer. And he started a manufacturing plant back in El Salvador for cleaning supplies. But everything changed in 1979, late 79. And you may know that El Salvador got into a civil war at that point. And he lived in a pretty nice neighborhood with his wife. But one day he's walking and he sees several bodies, murdered and mutilated, laying in the street, thumbs tied behind their backs. And that was not an isolated incident. It started happening more and more, and in the poor neighborhoods, way more bodies. Because the police and the death squads that arose wanted to make sure that nobody in the public would join the insurgency or they'd know what was in store for them. And in Guillermo's words, it doesn't take a politically active person, and not even a very moral person, he said, to have the deep sense of outrage that welled up in him after seeing these things. And it wasn't long before a person he knew that was on the left asked him if they could use his house for some meetings. And he said, okay. Well, San Salvador is not a big place, and it wasn't long after that before his house was raided, and he was dragged off with some others to a prison and put in a special cell that they told him, these are the people that get disappeared. They're never going to return. Well, he was very lucky because that same night, the first night, he's hearing voices talking in German out in the hallway. And he starts screaming out in German, come, and the next thing that they know, the cell is opened up, and it turns out the German speakers were from the Red Cross, and they were touring the jail. And they talked to Guillermo in German, and then they told the jailers, if anything unfair happens to these people, we're going to get it in newspapers all around the world. And so, fortunately, Guillermo and his friends were moved into the general prison population, mostly political prisoners, and that's where he spent the next 9 months. Well, this is the part of the story I'm not going to repeat in detail because the things that happened in the prison were horrendous. And the prisoners were subject to a lot of psychological torture as well because they had to watch what happened to each other and even to children. And even his wife was subject to it outside of the jail at times. So one day, he's released with no explanation. And his wife gets him, and they go home. They're very happy for all of 2 or 3 hours. And then a phone call comes. Picks up the phone, and in a sing-songy voice that he'll never forget, somebody says, "Oh, Guillermo, welcome home. We're glad you're home, but if you don't leave El Salvador within 48 hours, we'll kill your children and your wife." Well, fortunately for Guillermo, he had a visa from his work that allowed him to escape on a flight to Miami, and then they moved pretty quickly to Los Angeles. And for years, he was able to support his family with, I guess, contract jobs as a chemist in quality assurance for different companies. But during that time, our government supported the El Salvadoran government and was deporting any refugees that our customs agents picked up. In fact, when I first arrived in Palo Alto in '84, I worked on a video with a couple of churches in town that were providing sanctuary to Salvadoran refugees in defiance of our own government. Well, in LA, Guillermo was feeling, this is almost 5 years into living there, that they were closing in on him and he was about to get apprehended and deported. And apparently there were death squads that made a quick finish to a lot of the people that got deported because there were lists. And anyway, he made his way to the Canadian consulate. They gave safe passage to him and his family. And it was a number of years later that a company wanted him to work and got him a visa down here. And he was able to return and eventually become a citizen here. So I just wanted to say that I know so many immigrants that, you know, they had to summon up a lot of courage to start a whole new life here. But among them, there's a subset who have come with deep trauma lodged in their bodies, their memories, and they're our neighbors. And we just have to support them if we find out about that, because they're building new and productive lives and contributing to our community, but that's what they're carrying. And that, you know, even though we should be proud, the United States has let in more refugees and given them asylum when they've been persecuted for political and religious beliefs than any other country in the world since World War II. But sometimes our government has its stutters and its blind spots. So thank goodness for people like the church folks here that were giving sanctuary and trying to make things right. So thank you to you and for listening, and to Guillermo for sharing the story.